and we're going to talk about some of the data resources that have been collected in cooperation with the providers and some of the community anchor institutions in the state. And they're all accessible and ready for people to pick up and use, but we've also done some things with them that we think are kind of interest, and we thought we'd show some of those as well. And
feel free to ask questions throughout. This is.
Yeah, we've got some stuff to show, and but I think more than anything, if we can talk about something that you're interested in, we're happy to take a break and do that as well. Mm-hmm. Should I sit in the chair?
If you want.
These chairs look so comfortable.
They're probably not as comfortable as they look.
So the state broadband grants from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration came with two components. One is a planning component and one is a mapping component. And the mapping component, just real briefly, was seen as critical to supporting the decision making and the investigation of what the broadband landscape looked like across the country, and in particular in our state. And the thought was that being able to see all this information about what is out there in terms of infrastructure and services would help to engage people to talk about issues, to identify things that needed to be worked on, et cetera. And so we've been involved in the mapping process since the early part of 2010, and along the way we've collected lots of data in partnership with the providers and some of the community anchor institutions in the state, and we've been trying to paint the picture of what's going on out there, and also to assess trends, monitor performance, progress, that kind of thing, and confirm folks' intuitive understanding of the landscape as they look at the broadband picture. And I think ultimately the mapping effort is hopefully tying into the goal to promote the build out and adoption of broadband, which is seen as, I think universally, as a big contributor to economic growth. So that's the why. What have we been doing? Every 6 months, we've been collecting data per specifications that were determined at the federal level. We've been collecting data in two categories. One is provider coverage data, and providers submit that voluntarily to us, and we've had almost across the board 100% participation in that effort. And then the second category are these community anchor institutions like schools, libraries, government offices, healthcare facilities, that kind of thing. And we do this on a 6-month cycle. We collect the data and submit it to the NTIA and the FCC on April 1st and October 1st of each year. And what we're looking at from the provider data is the coverage area. Where do they have services? What technology are they using? What are the maximum advertised upload speeds and download speeds? The community anchor institutions piece, we're looking at primarily just what technology are they using at their facility, and what's their maximum speed or their subscribed speed. So this is what some of the data looks like that we've collected. For landline coverage, we're collecting data by and large for the coverage areas by census block, with the exception that in the rural areas where the census blocks are greater than 2 square miles in size, we're collecting it by road segments. So providers have been submitting us the census blocks where they have coverage along with the technology and speeds in those blocks. And in the most rural parts of the state, we get that data, but it's on top of road segments instead of census blocks. And then the wireless data looks kind of like this. We just get the area where they have been able to provide service, and generally this is from a signal propagation model, and it can be very detailed. So I mentioned the specifications for the data coming into the project were set forward in 2009 in advance of the state projects. On the Utah Broadband page, project page, we've got all the details for the specifications, what's being collected, how does it need to be coded, that kind of thing. So you can explore the webpage and see the devil in the details if you'd like. You want to talk about this?
The speed tiers?
Yeah, okay, I'll just keep going.
I could talk about it.
All right.
Basically, we put everything in a data model that's set by the federal government, by the NTIA, and it requires us to put speeds in different groupings, and that's what this is, which will become important later.
So the minimum definition for broadband in 2009 was anything over 768 kilobits per second. A few years later, the FCC came out with their national broadband plan, and they set the bar a little bit higher at 4 megabits per second for download speeds. But the speed tier piece that was set in 2009 still lives on in the project, and you can see they're not equal intervals, and there's quite a large range from code number 3, which is the minimum qualifying download speed, down to 10 and 11, which are in the gigabit area. So in addition to collecting the data from the providers, we've been doing a lot of verification activities. It's actually our duty to assess the data and submit what we think the broadband landscape actually is. So we're supposed to be the filter between what the providers submit and what goes up the food chain to the FCC and the NTIA. In large part, we found that the provider submitted data is pretty fantastic, but we do some verification activities, including some sort of basic technical review, exploring logic and limitations of the technology that's being used. We're also, each submission period, we're comparing what's submitted to what's advertised, and provider websites are a great site to see what's being advertised, so that's pretty straightforward. And then we've done two kind of more intensive activities. One focused on the mobile broadband speeds, and one focused on the landline-based services. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, so part of this broadband project has been building a statewide address point data set. That means for every single address, we know the exact XY coordinate, latitude, longitude of where it is, which is huge. So you know exactly where the addresses are. So we took that and we color-coded them by if they had access to wireline internet or not, according to our data. And we used that by making a map and going to the providers and saying, hey, do you know that red clump north of Torrey, Utah, does that really not have wireline? Most of the case, they did. We just had to kind of adjust it, or in some cases we didn't. And it kind of had to track down who provides service there, and if they really didn't have it, what are they doing for internet? A lot of them had wireless, fixed wireless, which is a great option too. So this was actually really helpful, and I think we're going to keep continuing with this data set because it really helps visualize where buildings are and who has internet and who doesn't.
The address point data set was something that we proposed in our grant proposal, and over the last couple of years we've worked with the county governments to fund their efforts to build a comprehensive set of addresses in the county with their latitude and longitude locations. And that's something that's going to live on outside of the project. I think it'll see a lot of use with public safety and probably tens of other applications. But yeah, the conversations we've had with providers where we've provided these detailed maps and said, can you take a look at this and tell us, are these folks really not served, or we just need to refine your data a little bit to capture the folks that you're actually serving. And
yeah.
I think we're really tuning this data in at a neighborhood level, and it's gotten a lot better just in the past 6 months with this address point review. So that's one of the verification.
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, I realized the legend's kind of hard to read. The blue is DSL coverage, and the red points, those are where people don't have access to wireline internet. According to our data, I think it changed since then, and the green are okay address points that we know have access. So
these maps got marked up.
So the blue's the DSL with wireline.
The maps got marked up in our meetings with the providers, and the blue gets edited to be a little bit finer representation of the service areas.
Sorry, I'll explain legends in the next ones.
Yeah, question.
Do you know any discrepancies in advertised speed versus what you're finding when you're actually doing the build, like as opposed to availability? Is it rare, or is it?
Every data set that comes in, the providers tell us their advertised speeds, and then I automatically go to their websites to try and find it. And I would say about 3/4 at least 3/4 of the time it agrees, and if it doesn't, I call them. And most of the time, they just haven't updated their websites, and I can confirm that just by calling around and talking around, because sometimes speeds are changing just in some small areas, so they're not going to put it on their website because it's in such a small area, but then it'll be on their website in 6 months. So you can kind of tell. I mean, people, they usually, I found, they don't lie to you. They're actually really honest, so.
I think that what he's talking about is advertised versus delivered.
Oh, delivered.
So.
Yeah, that's kind of tricky because it's hard. It is an option for them to give us typical speeds, but it ranges so much throughout the day, and so, I mean, we just kind of go with advertised speeds to try and stay across the board. I mean, I think people kind of expect that you're not going to get that 100% of the time, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the project, as it was architected at a national level, was focused on advertised speeds with a thought that if there was false advertising, that that's just not good for business, right? So, but certainly your maximum advertised speed for a lot of technologies is going to vary in relation to your typical speeds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Oh, sorry, I just had
Go
one
for it.
question also regarding that. So the wireless is based on the advertised speed. As I understand, the wire-based is based on the address points and the census blocks that they happen to be in, and in the rural areas, the
roads.
streets
Yeah.
that they're along. We have a provider on our council down in southwest Utah, and he mentioned kind of something interesting is that for wire-based, a lot of those companies, they have to provide, even if they're not providing internet, they have a service area that if someone came and moved in somewhere, they would have to provide that internet access to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Is that under DSL?
it's South Central Communications.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, well,
'Cause I know that-
they have kind of a variety
Yeah.
of different.
Because DSL is tied to the phone line, and I know that you have to provide phone to a person in your area. So, but
he
maybe it's
said
more
they have to provide internet.
internet, huh?
In that service area, I mean, under their
So-
agreement. So in his mind, it should show not only, where people have internet, but where they would have if they just called up South Central and said,
Yeah.
we want to sign up.
So
for internet.
that's a good point. So within the specifications for reporting data, there's the expectation, it's not where you have service right now, it's what you can realistically hope to deliver in 5 to 7 business days.
Okay,
So that's the criteria.
okay.
And you're right, some broadband services via DSL, and that's typically the telephone providers, and they actually have territories, areas where they have a tariff and they're the exclusive provider of telephone service there, local telephone service. And that's one of the things that we look at in verification is how well the DSL coverage matches those established telephone territories. Okay, so this is another verification activity. In 2011, we contracted out to have a drive test done in the state. We had about 6,000 miles of the state driven by a contractor called Isotrope. And they had consumer smartphone devices up in the rack on top of their car, and a logging server in the car, and they drove around the state on routes that we identified, which for the most part are state highways and some of the kind of heavily touristed areas, so some of the national park roads are in there. And each one of these devices from each of the providers was sending files out and recording how long it took to upload them, and then also pulling files off of a server and recording the time it took to download them. So this is, getting a typical experience. This is a very, a very good data set for what's going on out there, although it's a very narrow slice in time, right?
Can I explain the map real quick?
Yeah.
So The red is a strong signal, and the darkest red is the strongest signal, and then it goes to yellow, which is kind of a little bit weaker, and gray, if you can kind of see it, mostly in Garfield County there, that's where they didn't pick up any signal. And the blue behind it, that for 2011 is what this provider reported as their coverage area. So red, strong signal, yellow, a little weaker, gray, nothing. Blue is their service area.
So when we did this in 2011, I think by and large what we found was that the highest speed mobile broadband technology was really concentrated only on the Wasatch Front, and for the most part in Salt Lake County, because there had just been an LTE deployment. The other thing that we found was that, if anything, the providers were under-reporting what their coverage area was. And we made a map like this for each of the providers and shared that with them. And we also shared with them the data that was collected by this drive test firm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in some cases here you can see that we are picking up that yellow service where they weren't reporting it. And I know actually in the Uinta Basins, I think they were roaming to Strata's network. And so they might have been roaming in other areas, but I'm not sure about that. Verizon's changed a lot since then, so.
This is a close-up of that same drive test data in Arches National Park. You can actually see the sort of instantaneous speeds and how they varied as they moved around the Moab area and in the park.
You can see it dropping as you go to Delicate Arch.
And I think the thing to mention here is that we're actually doing that, another very similar test this fall. And the first test gave us really a way to verify the data that was being submitted against actual consumer experiences. This second test will let us do that again, but I think more importantly, it'll give us a picture for what the LTE landscape looks like in the state. And the folks who are working on the public safety broadband network, which goes by the name FirstNet sometimes, will have that data as a resource to look at as they contemplate how that's going to get built out in Utah. Okay, so how do you get a hold of this data?
It's all out there.
So as soon as we get data from providers and run it through a few checks and are ready to publish it, we will publish it immediately to our state broadband map, interactive map at broadband.utah.gov. I'm missing a dot. broadband.utah.gov/map. The map was built to do two things. One thing is, on the left side, is to find providers at a particular location. You can put in an address, and it will find that location and tell you the providers and speeds at that location. Or you can actually just zoom the map into your area, click on it, and it will give you the same list. And on the right side, there's a data filter which lets you explore the landscape of broadband in the state. You can filter by speeds, by technologies, and by individual or groups of providers. The data also is accessible via the National Broadband Map, nbm.gov. Takes a little longer for that to show up in the national map. And it has a similar set of functionality, but it also has sort of an almanac style set of functionality that pairs the data with some of the demographic information from the 2010 census. Our agency, AGRC, we run a website called gis.utah.gov that lets you download any data that's in the state geographic information database, so a bunch of digital map layers. And the broadband data is accessible here, as is a lot of the other data that we use in the project, like city boundaries and county boundaries and roads and legislative districts, et cetera, et cetera. Anything that we have that's that we can make publicly available is indexed at gis.utah.gov. Click off the data button on the top corner.
Click.
Or just advance one next.
Oh.
Yeah, so if you click
Here's the data button.
the data button, you can see our entire data holdings, and If you either type broadband into the search window or go down to utilities,
Which
you'll
is
get
down under you.
access to the broadband download page. Next. And it has the same data that's featured in our state broadband interactive map in a GIS format. You can also access the data and the interactive map off the right set of tabs on the broadband.utah.gov website. So pretty much everything that we're showing here you can get from one of those two tabs. Okay, so enough about how to get the data. Let's move on to, yes?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you constantly updating the map, or are you just doing it at 6-month intervals, the data? Are you updating that?
That's a good question. The emphasis is on every 6 months, but if I know a provider is going to have a major update that's not on that cycle, then we'll put it on then, or if they contact me. So we can do it anytime we get an update. We get it within 10 to 15 days on the website. So
And
that's pretty rolling.
when it goes up to the mapping website, is the shape files and everything available about the same time, or is there?
That's every 6 months. But if you need a more updated database, then you can just contact me. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation. So.
Thank you.
We actually use the state broadband map to allow providers, we'll load the data that we get into the broadband map and send a link out to the providers and say, your data's loaded. We still have a couple weeks before we have to submit this to the NTIA and FCC. Here's a link that opens the page with just your data showing. Take a look at it. Let us know if it's, not the way you thought it would be, want it to be. Okay, so some of the maps that we've made to characterize the landscape in Utah, the broadband landscape. This is our highest known speed map, where we've actually put in two factors into this map. The colors are the highest identified speed that's been reported to the project.
Red is the fastest.
Down to purple and black, which are kind of the areas of the state
Not the fastest.
where some more work probably needs to be done. This map is current as of the October 2013 submission, so last couple of weeks. And what we're doing here is we're looking for the highest known broadband speed in the community. So if that's at a school, that's what we'll use. If it's something the provider reported they provide to consumers, then that's what we'll use. The other thing we've done with this map is we've factored in a measure of the market challenges for the community. So the bigger the dot, the higher the community scored using this USDA measurement of how small the community is and the I guess it was median household income. Is that right? So the higher challenges for getting broadband to the community are going to be represented by bigger dots. And I think the story from this map is that Utah has had some really impressive successes in getting broadband into some of the smaller rural areas, but there's still a little bit of work to be done. But on the whole, I think really a lot has been accomplished.
And this map, if you can't really read it, is downstairs in poster format. So.
We also broke those speed tiers that we showed earlier into a couple of sort of use cases. And case one was kind of basic consumer broadband. Can I check my email? Can I browse the web? Case two was sort of a home office or education system. You want to be able to do things like video conferencing or watching videos, like that kind of thing. And so each of these cases, and we had a third case that was sort of a very high capacity user. We've made a map showing the areas where there's coverage at each of these case levels.
Yeah, so the red on this is we went through and we used the demographic data from the 2010 census to see where people are. So that's where the bright red is. That's where settlement is. A lot of areas in Utah are unsettled. And the blue is broadband that meets that threshold, and it's layered on top. So it's kind of purpley. You can see the red underneath, like, oh, there's people there, but there's broadband on top of it. So the red areas are where there's people there, but they don't have that level of service available to them. That's the bright red.
This is just using sort of the consumer level
Yeah, this is just residential, I think.
Right. So
Yeah.
case 2 on the right, the provider would have to report at least 10 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. And the upload speed is one that tends to trip people a little bit. So
Yeah.
So you said there was a third map. Can we get a
yeah, there's a third map. I don't have it in this slide presentation, but all these maps are available on from the resources tab, broadband.utah.gov. There's a resources tab and there's a map gallery, and you can access all of these maps there.
I don't know who made these, I assume AGRC.
Mm-hmm.
So could we actually get the shapefile?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. just-
Everything in these maps is in the data that we collect and submit. Yep. And you can get the data from AGRC's website or from the broadband.utah.gov resources tab.
And I'm the one who made this map, so if you want the MXD, just email me. Jesse Peshman. Yeah.
I wonder how granular do these get? Like,
That's a good question.
like Cody that wanted to look at just Alpine School District, or
It's probably not that granular. We map to the census block, which in some areas is just like a city block, but once you get out of the more populated areas, it's huge. So at that point, you want to contact the provider, and that's something that our map can help you, is if you go to an address on our state map, it'll show all the providers, including mobile, that we have for that area, and that's probably when you want to contact them in their sales department.
So yeah, I got a slide I think that may play
have
to
that.
what you're asking in a second. Okay, so in this case with the use cases, we actually have the results of the analysis available as tabular data in a Google Doc that's linked off of the map of the month post as well. So if you just want raw tabular data, it's organized in a public-facing Google Doc. You want to talk about this?
Sure. So this map, I have to say, is this one might be a little outdated because it was based on our last data submission, but it's pretty much still the same. So the Utah Broadband Project is focusing on associations of governments, which are groups of counties. And so because of that, we wanted to look at internet in each of those groups. So what we did is we took those use cases that you saw, and this one includes that third one, which is the red, the highest capacity that we didn't see on that last map. And we grouped the percentage of people that the highest was, so this is kind of hard to explain, sorry. So the red, that looks like 75% maybe in mountain land. 75% of the people there, their highest broadband is that high capacity. But down in 5 County, about maybe 2/3, a little less, of their highest broadband internet is home office. Does that make sense? More or less.
Yeah, I
So-
think we're just rolling up the use cases into a
Into pie
summary
charts.
graphic for each one of the AOG areas.
And obviously, if, people can get less internet, that's just the percentage that can get the highest. Yeah.
so what you're saying is more red means there's more high capacity available in that region?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. To the population. So it's based on population, not area.
Here's another map showing the highest advertised consumer speeds across the state. Lots of red on the Wasatch Front. Surprisingly, good amount of red in the rural communities. The lighter colors in the background show where there is wireless available.
Which is fixed wireless and mobile.
Yeah. So the brighter colors are the landline-based technologies. Next.
So yeah. This map has changed a lot. We've had this exact map, so.
And then this is a similar map showing sort of the highest order technology. I don't know if that's a great term because I think that's kind of changing a little bit. But we've got areas with fiber shown in red, areas without fiber but that have wireline coverage in blue. And
It's
then
fiber to the end user, not the infrastructure. So it's not dark fiber.
right. And then the areas where there's wireless only in green. And then this is what you were asking about, smaller areas. The those two concepts, the consumer broadband availability by speed and the technology footprint, we've got some software that let us just generate a map book for all the legislative districts. And we've kind of we did this last February during the session. We ripped those statewide maps into smaller focused area maps and made those available by House and Senate district. So the maps don't have to be statewide. We can drill in on these either using some sort of an automated map generation technique, or we can put them in an interactive map with zoom controls to let people go in and see a particular area.
You made a paper, obviously, for my senators, but can I get MXDs on these?
Sure.
Yes. Yeah, and if you're wondering about the granularity in a certain area, I encourage you to go to the interactive map on our website, and then you can kind of see the data there in a pretty easy format and kind of understand what it looks like zoomed in.
Yeah, and maybe the comment
If we have
to
time,
add
I
to
can show that.
is that the census block, I should have said this earlier, census block is in Provo, a census block is a block. In rural areas, they tend to be larger areas. But so that's the granularity you're going to find in most of the data.
Topic maps.
Okay, topic maps. We've made some maps along the way. We've worked with UEN extensively to report the broadband capabilities available at Utah schools. We've even helped them map their network and the different speeds that they have and the logical connections between hubs across the state. And this is, we put this in an interactive map so you can zoom on the incredibly kind of densely networked area along the Wasatch Front. But that's what it looks like statewide. We've mapped, working with the state library and contacts in the library system, we've got current broadband speeds at the public libraries in the state. And together with that, in the rural areas, sometimes there isn't a library. They're served by a bookmobile. And we've got information about the availability at all the bookmobiles, and they've got a few problem areas where they are having a hard time with their air cards and their mobile broadband services. So we're working with them in conjunction with this 2013 drive test to focus, to go get specific information in, I don't know, it's probably about 10 or 12 stops in the state where they're having a hard time getting their iPads to work because they don't have the mobile connectivity that they're looking for. Here's another topic map. Anytime that there's a funding program that comes out with specific criteria, in this case it was a USDA Community Connect fund eligibility criteria, we looked at the criteria that the feds announced and then ran our data with those particular constraints and tried to produce a map showing the areas that qualified for that program.
And we split wireline and wireless because to us it's kind of hard to compare. So the bright red is where we knew that hit the threshold for this grant, and yellow is kind of maybe, and gray it's good. So
in this case, the USDA broadband threshold was 3 megabits per second combined downstream and upstream. And we're working with the speed tier, so it's not a perfect
correlation
analysis, but we figured we'd paint a picture of about what that looks like for Utah in terms of opportunities. Yes?
Are there other grant programs out there?
I'm not sure if there has been quite a few in the last 5 years, but besides this one, I'm not sure which ones are continuing. It's kind of up to the government.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of phases of mobility funding out of FCC
Yeah.
for developing mobile broadband in rural areas. We've looked at those.
Mm-hmm. This is a good example of how you can look at a map and kind of see which areas jump out at you as areas that might, need some broadband work. So kind of where you see the red over in Millard County and down here. So it's kind of where data turns into action, hopefully.
And I think our last kind of topic map, we were looking at some of the kind of end users out in the field who needed broadband connectivity to conduct their business. And in this example, this one's pretty close to home because this has to do with another activity that we're involved with at AGRC. We run a network of GPS base stations around the state. And if you're a surveyor or if you're running precision equipment, then you can use a connection to this base station network to increase the precision of your GPS measurements down to sub-centimeter level. But to do this, if you're out in the field surveying, in addition to your survey-grade GPS unit, you've got to have a data plan, probably through a smartphone, that talks to our central server and receives the signal to refine the location. So we did a map showing where all the base stations were, and then the mobile broadband coverage that would be at the level that you'd need to do surveying and other activities from each of the providers in the state. So folks are out there who need this to conduct their business, and in this case we combined the availability from each of the providers with some of the information about this particular service. Yes?
So, because I didn't wear my glasses and can't read the legend, yellow is good, green is better?
So the blue,
Yes.
sorry, the blue area in this case is the area that, the covered area from Verizon. And this map is from last summer. We need to update that. So the blue area is the covered area by Verizon, and then the triangles, the colored triangles on the map, show the quality of the refinement you're going to get from the network. And really it correlates with how close the stations are together. The closer they are, the more certainty you're going to have that you're going to get this sub-centimeter level measuring precision from the GPS network.
So he's right. So blue is possible, red is, this is getting service, I think. And red's probable, yellow's expected, and green is certain. So yeah, green's best, yellow's good, red and blue, eh.
And Sean Fernandez runs the network for us, and he's also worked on
Yeah, interesting.
managing the collection of all the address points from the counties. And without the broadband project, I think the surveyors on the field would have to take kind of a guess at whether or not they were going to have connectivity or not, and be able to use the service, or whether they would have to go collect the data in the field and then come back to their office and spend a lot of extra time to post-process the data before it was usable. Is that fair? So I think this lets them, among other things, they can do it in real time, and they can also, if they're going to bid on a project, they know whether or not this resource is going to be available for them there or not. And they can, hopefully that means where it is available, it's less time for them, it's less expensive for the end user who needs the surveying done.
Change detection.
Okay,
Real quick.
yeah.
So, let me go. Okay, so back to the speed tiers of the groupings of the maximum advertised speeds. We wanted to get a grasp on how speeds had changed since the beginning of the project. So we started in fall 2010, which is when we feel like we had the most complete data set. And we compared it to the data set we just updated this last fall. And we figured out for each populated place how many speed tiers, so those groupings, a populated area jumped. Everybody went up, so that's good. So the bigger...
Just remember the speed tiers aren't even increments, right?
Right.
So some of these, like one speed tier could be...
A huge jump. Or
it
small.
It could be going from 1 megabits or 1.5 megabits per second in a community to 3 megabits per second. That would be a speed tier, but in the Wasatch Front, it might mean from 100 megabits per second to a gigabit. But either way, the speed tiers are significant changes when they go up.
So the bigger the circle, the more of the increase of the speed tiers.
So this is
So-
for fixed broadband
Yeah,
technologies, and it includes fixed wireless. And you can see where
And
we've seen
wireline.
changes since we first collected a a statewide data set. So in 3 years, this is what's happened. We've got some places that are jumping 5, 6, 7 speed tiers.
And this map is also downstairs on a poster size, as is the speeds map. And this is the same map, but for mobile. So I thought this map was really interesting that across the board, almost, there's a lot of providers that jumped 2 speed tiers, but there's some that jumped a lot more than that, so.
So we don't have like an absolute figure in terms of the progress that's been made, but you can see in just 3 short years, both in the fixed technologies and the mobile technologies, there's been a remarkable amount of change.
So we also have this data on our website in another public-facing Google Docs, so.
All right, so to conclude, what's coming next? I mentioned that we're doing the drive test this fall for mobile technologies. So that's devices from Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, Breakaway Wireless in central Utah, and Strata out in the Uinta Basin. And then there's one more national provider I'm forgetting. Is it
Sorry, I wasn't listening
Oh, that's
closely.
okay.
Do you remember LEAP?
Leap, yeah. So we're doing the drive test this fall. We'll publish a comparison of the results in addition to just making the raw data available and doing some of the similar analytical maps that we've done with it. 2014, in the spring, we'll have another 6-month provider data submission to the project. And then in the fall, we'll get a submission from the providers, but it's also the transition point at which the data will be moving towards its kind of next phase in life, which will be inclusion in the FCC's Form 77
477.
Did I say 47 form?
Form 477.
Thank you. Process. So the state submission and the FCC submission will run concurrently, and then from that point forward, the same or similar data will be collected through the FCC's process, and we'll go back to our day jobs. And our goal has been really, especially with this address point verification, is to try and help the providers as much as we can to get their data into the best possible format and make this new FCC process as easy to navigate, and also have the data be as good as it possibly can be as it makes that transition.
I just wanted to put this up real quick in case you wanted to write down our contact
There was one other thing I
information.
wanted to say about but you don't have to go back. You leave that up.
Okay.
And that is that one of the substantive changes between the current process and the FCC's process is that the FCC has decided to treat fixed wireless as being mapped similar to how landline wireless is being mapped. So in that transition and then going forward, fixed wireless will be reported at census block level, and there won't be any road segment reporting at all. Everything will be reported as census blocks for landline technologies and fixed wireless, and then the mobile wireless will be reported, again, using those propagated areas. And that's what we've got, pretty much.
So did everyone get this screen?
You want to?
I wanted to real quick make sure you don't have the interactive map up. Broadband.
So for those of us that are unfamiliar, what is this new FCC process that you referred to?
Do you want me to talk about it a little bit?
Sure.
So,
Well, let me just start and say that Form 477 already exists, and providers are already using it to submit information, but it's at a much coarser level, and it's kind of a separate process. So right now there are 2 processes. The FCC has this process that's been in place for years and years.
What does the process do?
It's reporting service area and coverage, and it allows them to look at sort of the landscape and help inform their policy making, in theory, right?
so right now, actually funded through the stimulus, which was 5 years ago now. The states are giving grants to collect this data, but that was it's slated to sunset at the end of 2014. So the data collection for the map, because they want to keep the national broadband map, is switching to this form that already exists, the form 477. So.
But they're augmenting it with essentially what they thought was beneficial out of this process.
Yeah. So I just wanted to show you guys real quick this map. I don't know what address I should put in. Anyone have an address they want to know about broadband?
Yeah, 2381 south, 450 east,
What's the zip code?
4032.
Yeah, that's what we want.
So this is an example how you can just type in any address, or up here you can type in any place name, like a national park, city, anything like that, and you can see which providers in what area, which is right here on the list on the left. You can also filter by types, so it's kind of hard on a mouse, I don't know, but let me zoom out. So you can say, oh wow, this entire area is covered, but is it covered, like if I take off wireline? Looks pretty urban, so yeah, so there's also wireless, but if you zoom out, oops, you can just kind of see.
Take off the wireless and try the wireless.
Yeah, let me try that. So it's a fun map to kind of get started to look at our data and what we have. And if you want to get more into the data, we actually have a Google Doc that's also public that explains how to use the data, what the fields, the columns mean, and the attribute tables. So, and kind of a more detailed explanation of what we gave today of what the data is. So.
Can you zoom in on that red dot?
Mhm.
Is that actually a hole in the service area then? Those spots?
Yes, is this where you live and you can't get service? Is that whole right, or is it wrong?
I think that's wrong.
Okay.
I'd have to look at it a little closer though.
Somebody went to a great deal of effort though to map that. I mean, it's,
Yeah, why did they skip my block? What did I do?
This.
So just knowing the general area, I think this is in it's
South
in-
of Heber.
Yeah, in Daniel, relatively recently incorporated town of Daniel, and I'm guessing that the providers reporting service for that area, when they did their analysis, they didn't have customer addresses that they could identify within those census blocks. And if they have a customer in that census block that they can provide service to within 5 to 7 days, then they can claim that as an area served. And like the island down here in the lower part looks to be relatively new development. I know that that's 2012 aerial photography, and it looks like they're just putting roads in. But
You're a professional or not, but I know in Alpine, we have exactly this. It's because the city allows a developer to build $1 million homes without putting anything in the ground. And people freak out. They buy this $500,000 house and then they go to connect and, oh, there's no fiber and there's no copper and there's no, and I mean, we wouldn't let them build a house like that and put a sewer system.
I would hope not.
Put a little shanty out back. We'll let them do new construction
Yeah.
without putting any kind of fiber or internet or anything in.
I do know that some providers they're pretty good at getting in with the new developments, so it kind of depends on which area in the state you're in, I think, but
But we have pockets just like that all over.
yeah. I know the providers are trying to catch up, and in some cases the mapping data, might be 6 months behind, so hopefully I'll write a note of this one.
the classic situation is you're in a residential area that's where you have mature trees, so the wireless technology, the fixed wireless isn't going to work great, and you're in a planned unit development where the covenants restrict putting overhead wires, but there was nothing in the ground. That for some reason, maybe the cable company didn't get in there in the 70s and put stuff in the ground, and there's no conduit either. So there's little pockets of that, for sure.
Is that accounted for?
What's up?
Is that accounted for in the map? I mean, trees?
Uh,
Seems like your wireless coverage
For fixed wireless, yeah, I mean, it's line of sight, right? So we don't have the ability to model trees, unfortunately. And you know, they do have there is sort of the criteria that if you can serve one person in that census block, you can claim it as covered area. So some of these very, very, very fine level issues, we're not able to map.
It's okay, we like what you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
I just want to say by that same token, as a person who makes maps every day, and I've told you guys this before, thank you for all the data that you provide us because it helps my job a ton.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for helping our job in providing data for us. But you're welcome. Any other questions about data and how you can use it? Just contact us if you need any more help or direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think in summary, it's not, you know, this is by no means perfect, but if you go back, roll the clock back 3 years ago, we didn't have any of this. And we couldn't even ask, you know, the questions about whether this was perfectly representative or not. And I think at a little bit of a, you know, maybe not a 30,000 foot level, but at maybe like a 4,000, 5,000 foot level, I think this data is really good, and it's really good in large part due to the cooperation and participation of the providers and the schools and the libraries and that kind of thing. And hopefully this supports sound policy to continue what's already rolling forward and making great progress. So, thank you.